So we should definitely talk a little bit about Dave because you've stepped into his shoes and them are some pretty big shoes to fill. So
Yeah,
would you, I mean, you don't have to say this just because you're in the band, but would you put him up there with some of the greatest bass players of all time?
absolutely. I I'm trying to think of who else is up there for me. What's interesting to me about Dave, amongst many things, was like the discovery that he was 27 years old when he started playing with those guys, or 26, 27, and that was his first band. So I feel like I look back on that with that knowledge that I only gained within the last I, I've always known his age, but I never really put it together. But when I figured it out within the last 10 years, I've thought, wow, he was bringing something different to the band because he was still kind of new to the instrument, and he was a fan of like jazz and bebop and like the Beatles and definitely punk too. But he was born in 1956, so he by the time Joe and Rodney and Dean were discovering like punk, like Dave was already like in his 20s, um so I don't know. I mean, this is all just me because I think about Dave a lot because I definitely looked up to him. When I went to see them, it was their last show. um I purposely went and found where Dave was standing and went like as close as I could to the stage to like watch what he was doing. um so yeah, I never got to meet Dave. I I met his brother and became friends with his brother Kurt back in like the low budgets days, and I would like pass messages to Dave through Kurt. I would be like, "Tell Dave he's the best bass player ever," and then the next time I'd see Kurt, he'd be like, "Dave says you're crazy." And I'm like, "But he acknowledged I said something cool."
Well, would you say he invented that bass style? Because I've heard that said at least a couple of times.
I can't think of any other. Like I said, when I put him like up there, I can't think of anybody else who does that kind of thing. Um, and it's been an amazing experience. Like it was great as a fan listening to Dave's bass playing and watching him play live, but having to learn his bass lines has been like educational for me because he does some weird shit. Like he'll play these notes, like going back to watching Scotty die. Just listen to it. um, like when Joe's saying like he came back colored yellow, like Dave's doing this and it works. The notes work, but he chooses these interesting notes to play, and I hear it all over the place. The end of life is shit, like the way he's climbing down. And for years, I confess this in one of the big questions. For years, I was playing the wrong bass line at the end of that song, and then one day I listened to it. I was like, "Oh wow, he's going here with it." So did he invent that style? I mean, it's hard to even pin down what the style is, um, but you don't hear much of that like moron do 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 do, or nutrition is similar to that, like do 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 do. Like who was doing that? I don't know.
What would you say was the most difficult bass line to learn then that you have successfully learnt?
Oof. Wow. I think one that I walk the thinnest line has it's fairly repetitive in what it does, but it does do this like climbing down thing over the chorus. But then there's this like little like instrumental like solo-y part uh where Joe and Dave are both climbing up the neck like do 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 do. And this is a perfect example of something that Dave does that's totally in my mind like unique and original. He works within this scale and he's playing the right notes in this interesting order, especially contrasting what Joe is doing. Like they're doing similar things, but they're working within like thirds or something of each other. Um, And I overthink these things, but like next time you listen to that track, like you'll hear what I'm talking about. It's like, I guess, the bridge of the song. Yeah, another one. Let's see. If you love somebody, set them on fire. That was another one that felt good when I quote unquote mastered it, which is debatable because every once in a while I still hit like certain wrong notes. But it's cool. It's like all over the place, but again, repetitive. Like he'll like play this weird thing, but he repeats it. So
Well, let's talk about those reunion shows from 2004.
yeah, those were like Dave had died in March of 2004, and pretty quickly after that, like within a few weeks or months, maybe, Kurt, Dave's brother, started talking about doing like a tribute show. And he talked to Chris from the Low Budgets, who was instrumental in helping that come together too. And then by November, we played the two shows. So I guess we started practicing in the like summertime.
Yeah, well, let's get deep into that because I want to know what the band dynamics were like as you stepped in at that time.
Low Budgets played a local show at a bar, and before we were playing, like I had like started drinking some beer, and Joe was like, "Oh, we're gonna do at least one like tribute show for Dave at the Chalk. Do you want to play bass for it?" And I was like, "Uh, I don't know. That's let me think about that." And it was weird. My blood like ran cold for a second. I was like, I'm scared of this idea. Of course, I'm drinking a little more, and then the Low Budgets play this set, which was like the bass amp blew at the end, and like I think I like fell over or something, and it was like I was just kind of drunk. And then I go up to Joe and I was like, you know what? I'll definitely do it. I know every one of those fucking songs. I'll totally do this. And it was the kind of thing where like the next morning when I woke up, I was like, I think I had to call Joe and I was like, did we really have this conversation? He's like, yeah, we're going to do some shows. And I was like, okay. So then they said, this was like, Joe told me like I could audition for the band. I didn't actually find out until a few years later that they didn't have anybody else play. I thought that they were literally like auditioning me and like checking out some other people too. I met them at where we still practice to this day. This place called East Side Studios in Philly. Um, and that was where I met Rodney for the first time. I had met Dean already. Um, and that's a whole other story. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I still find it odd how I prepared for this. Like I didn't really sit down and play along to the songs. I had already spent like my teenage years doing that. So by the time we got into practice, I just had to look at Joe, who I already knew. I'd already been playing in a band with him at that point for 4 or 5 years. Uh, and I would just kind of like see what key it's in, you know, and then play it. And we spent 2 hours doing this, and they were like, "All right, well, this was great. Like, we'll let you know, or whatever." And then, of course, they asked me to be in the band. And at first, they would pay me for practices and shows. Like I was like a hired hand kind of thing. So we didn't know how. Well, 2004 was there was no pay. This was a benefit show for Dave and a Serbian monastery that he supported.
Do you know what happened to him? Like, what was good? Did I misread this, or did he visit Yugoslavia and attempt to help rebuild it after some attacks or something? Have I made that up?
Well, he lived in Serbia for a couple years, and he ended up leaving because he was being bombed so bad, like NATO bombing. He had close friends, some that didn't make it, and it's I'm glad you asked that because it reminds me I need to talk to someone about this because I had talked to someone. I don't know, Dave like has always kind of been somewhere like I don't know. what I believe like spiritually, but I feel like Dave has always kind of hovered around near me. Like he like visited me in a dream and I recorded it when I woke up. Um, and I feel like I've always been curious about that time. Like what I don't hear anything about him being like a religious or like spiritual person, but there was a Serbian monastery that must have been really powerful, like profound to him. Or at least the people there, uh, because that's where like his estate is. He never had kids. So like royalties and all the stuff that like Dave's name makes, like as far as I know, it goes to this like Serbian monastery. Um, so yeah, he studied like Eastern European economics in the States after the band broke up, and that must have been part of what inspired him. They had also toured Yugoslavia in the early '90s, and I think he fell in love with it there.
Do you think he was mentally well near the end?
No, um, like I said, I never met him personally, but from what I hear from not only the band but both of his brothers, um, he didn't he didn't uh, grieve well after their mother passed away. That was a big part of his struggling. I think he was pretty close with his mom, and she died in like January, I think, and then he died in March. So